I mean, we could have secondary ignition diagnostics that need to be done, fuel injection diagnostics, fuel trim diagnostics, charging system diagnostics, brake system, hydraulic system. Hey guys, welcome back. Steve here with 6 Star Automotive. Today I'm going to talk about something extremely important that there's a lot of misconception about in the industry. But before we get started, please like, subscribe, and join me as we talk about diagnosis. So like I've said in a lot of the other videos that I've done so far, diagnosis is probably the most important thing that we do here. There's a saying that we have here that diagnosis is the cornerstone of automotive care. It's actually a playoff of a saying in the medical field about diagnosis being the cornerstone of healthcare. Without taking the necessary steps and performing the necessary procedures and tests, finding the source of the problem that you're having is really only speculative. Even though a dedicated and experienced technician can often be right using speculation, it's definitely not professional, and it really isn't the best course of action for you or the shop. The last thing I want to see is you spend money on something that ends up not being your problem. Over the years, I've developed a lot of testing strategies and a lot of specific steps for a vast array of different problems that can happen on a vehicle in order to minimize the amount of failures that we have with diagnostics and with repairs, and to maximize the efficiency and time that it takes to figure them out. So in order for us to get to the answer quickly and correctly, we must do the necessary tests. So what are some examples of the tests and procedures that I'm talking about? So one of the good examples is what we call NVH, or noise, vibration, and harshness diagnostics. From my experience, NVH diagnosis is one of the most eluding and difficult diagnostics to master. Without the thousands of dollars of test equipment that's necessary to determine the proper order and frequency of the vibration that's felt, determining the source of that noise or vibration can be highly speculative. The experience necessary to determine a squeak from a squeal, or a rattle from a clunk, or a vibration from a wobble, knowing the speed of the tires based on the speed of the vehicle or the speed of the drive shaft, all of that comes into consideration when the technician is driving the vehicle. He has to be able to feel those differences and determine the correct course of action for the diagnosis. Here at 6 Star Automotive, it's very common for us to ask to go for a test drive with you specifically so that we can determine exactly what you're hearing, so there's no miscommunication or issues with what we hear versus what you hear, so we don't end up fixing something that we believe was the problem when you heard something completely different. Like I was referring to before, our job isn't really much different than the medical field. The diagnostics are really just as complicated. A good example is a doctor being able to take a stethoscope and listen to your lungs and say, yes, that's pneumonia, or no, you just have a cold. As you can see in this relatively rudimentary diagram of a vehicle, there's a lot of stuff going on here at any given time. I mean, we could have secondary ignition diagnostics that need to be done, fuel injection diagnostics, fuel trim diagnostics, charging system diagnostics, brake system, hydraulic system diagnostics, starting and charging system diagnostics. There's so many different tests, and every single one has a different diagram, has a different set of procedures that's necessary to determine exactly what's going on with the vehicle when it has a problem. So it's not uncommon for me to hear people ask about the price of diagnosis or the cost of diagnosis being rolled over into the repair. This is something that some shops have done in the past, and I've been a technician that's had to deal with that myself, and it's really bad practice. It discourages the technicians from doing proper diagnostic procedures in order to get to an answer and to get the job done quickly, rather than mastering what they actually do well. Paying for diagnosis is very important, because the technician, just like the doctor, needs to have the incentive necessary to do what's right. So if a shop doesn't end up getting paid for the diagnosis, the technician doesn't end up getting paid for the diagnosis, and it's not right for the technician at all. And that's one thing that I've pushed for here, is to make sure that the customers are taken care of, obviously first, but the technicians and the staff are taken care of as well. They're very important to make this business run properly. Again, using another correlation with the medical field, asking a technician not to get paid for his ability and skill in diagnostics is kind of the same thing as going to the doctor and trying to determine whether or not your stomach ache is just a flu or an illness, or is it your appendix, or is it cancer, is it potentially your kidneys or your liver, do you need blood tests? All those things are vastly different in which direction you would end up going. So doing the test that's necessary to determine what actually the problem is again the most valuable part of what a doctor does and what we do as well. And I don't mean to beat anybody down about this. Like, I totally understand why people think that, diagnosis isn't really valuable, because, over the years, you get pretty good at what you do and you can be right a lot of the time. A lot of technicians in shops will devalue themselves. It doesn't really incentivize having technicians work long term. You end up losing them because they go through all this training, they get all this experience, and they don't really have any incentive to continue. But from my experience in movies and in TV, it's portrayed that technicians just know the answer. If you just go to them, they just know the answer, and it's obvious, and they can be 10 years old and figure out what's going on. And it doesn't really work that way. You don't just hear lean on bank 2 like in Gone in 60 Seconds. That's movie nonsense. I'm sure whether you're an accountant or a bricklayer or a plumber or a roofer or an administrator, there are parts of your job that other people may devalue that's taken you years, if not decades, to master. So just as I would recognize that in you and your profession, I have to recognize that in my technicians and service advisors as well. They are extremely knowledgeable, experienced, and professional, and I couldn't ask for a better team. If there's anything that I missed or any questions that you have about this topic, please leave a comment below. Thanks for watching as usual, and come on by to experience a 6-star difference for yourself. Before we get started, please like, subscribe, and join me. Blast. Oh man, I'm gonna get it one of these days.